Hello, my name is Amanda Sturgill. I'm a faculty member at Elon University, and I am talking to you about my work with the AltGov movement on Twitter and how it might enact or fight the spiral of silence. And I call my presentation Humans versus Robots for a reason I think will become clear pretty soon. Before we get there, though, I need to take you back to the early time of 2016. And we now know that at that time, the social media in the United States was being bombarded by messaging from other countries that was trying to interfere in the ongoing presidential election. And this was later found out and became the subject of a special Senate Committee on Intelligence report, as well as the Mueller report investigating the impact of the Russian actions on the election itself. And so the issues that were present at the time were these. First of all, we were already dealing in a pretty polarized information environment. So we were finding that the country had very different opinions on issues such as minority rights, on immigration, on the economy, on abortion, all different kinds of things. Very strong opinions on two sides, and that the middle was kind of falling out as the two sides moved further apart. At the same time, the Pew surveys on how Americans tend to get their news began finding that most Americans were getting their news from social media. So news was finding them through being shared in the feeds that they have on social media. And this becomes an issue because social media companies make their money by showing their advertising to as many people as possible. And in order to get you to stay on their page so that you see more ads, social media algorithms try to show you information that they know that you will like. And that tends to be information that you will already agree with. As you get a diet of information that becomes more in line with what you already believe, it becomes harder for you to see information that might be disconfirming to what you already know. So the actions that were taken in these social media campaigns by the other countries used two different strategies to try to work with that aspect of social media and the polarized information environment to achieve the goals of those countries. Those we will call bots and trolls. We can start with trolls. Trolls are people who are paid, not always paid, sometimes they do it just because they like to cause chaos, but in this situation generally paid, to create messages and to sort of respond to messages and bring different ideas into the public sphere. And so they will do things like creating social media posts, creating social media events, commenting on other people's posts, going into news sites and participating in the comments on news stories, things like that. So trolls are creating information. Bots are automated programs that will like particular posts. Maybe they like particular hashtags, maybe they work together in a little network of other bots where they will all try to promote the same message at the same time. Maybe they will promote particular people when they say things, but bots will retweet. They can be written to script automated replies. They will like things. They will follow accounts. And so when bots take ideas, they make ideas seem more popular than they in fact are, because it's not people who are liking and resharing, it is these automated programs. The social media companies at the time were not very good at determining which traffic was coming from bots and which traffic was coming from people, but they were using those popularity metrics, likes, replies, retweets, reshares, as a way of determining what other people might be interested in seeing. So those messages were much more likely to be showing up in someone's feed than messages that were not being promoted by these bot networks and created by these trolls. Why does this matter? For a couple of reasons. The first one is that we know from previous research that the opinion environment on social media can suppress speech in a similar way to the opinion environment in someone's face-to-face life may cause them to not express things that are going to have social cost for them, right? The basic idea of spiral of silence. Social media can be anonymous, and in a sense, people have accepted that there's going to be some anonymous stuff, so they will follow, for example, brand Twitter, right? And Burger King's funny and Wendy's is funny, and so we will still engage with those accounts and whoever is behind them without ever knowing who the person is or being able to judge those messages. The third idea I wanted to look at is the idea of a cyber speech cascade. And so this is an idea that comes out of this paper by Mathis and colleagues looking at the communication strategies of authoritarian governments. And authoritarian governments will want to not have speech that is against the government. It is very difficult to police all speech on all different types of social networks. So what the authoritarian governments will rely on is the idea that speech is being policed rather than the reality that speech is being policed. Some speech may be policed, much of it is not. And a cyber speech cascade will happen when there is a small, relatively, number of messages that are not experiencing the consequence people think they might be getting. And it is an illustration of the fact that maybe those consequences aren't real after all, and that whole sort of house of cards falls. And so even though there might be a spiral of silence based on the cost of speaking out against the government, that can actually go away in the face of some disconfirming speech in this cyber speech cascade. Okay, so when we think about it, we can think about the opinion environment that we have right now as being very complicated. We've got the idea of the trolls and bots, making it so that you get messages that look like they're trending, but why are they trending, and are they people or not? And you've got the potential for small numbers of actors to be able to really maybe overcome some of that. And that's what I was looking at in this study. I did that by looking at a couple of central questions. First of all, if the complicated opinion environment suppresses speech, so if the bots and trolls are working and making people be silent because they think their ideas are less popular than they are, but also if the complicated opinion environment might also encourage speech, if a small number of individuals with sincerely held beliefs express them, can that help overcome the suppression? I did this by looking at the AltGov. So this is an example of a post from an AltGov account, and so it is coming from an account that is related to the Washington administrative offices of the National Park Service, and is actually giving an explanation for why the AltGov accounts exist. I thought it was interesting that this actually came out this week as sort of a reminder of why they are there in reaction to some political people being removed from their offices because they're disagreeing with the president. The AltGov movement itself is a group of affiliated accounts on Twitter that look like they are coming from various federal agencies. And this is an example of an AltGov family portrait. That's sort of the last one that they have done. And each one of these little people here, each one of these little icons, is representing something that says it's from an account from a worker for the federal government. This is not true. Some of these accounts are people who do presently have jobs with the agencies that it looks like the account is for. Quite many of them do not. Either because they no longer work for that particular agency or because they never did. And they're just a person who has maybe some knowledge in that area. So for example, maybe working in a heavily regulated industry, working in a state government that interfaces with the federal government, working for a government contractor, those kinds of things. So some of them actual federal employees, some of them not actual federal employees. They all act together, though, as if they are. And together they will do some things, and as individuals they largely are trying to essentially be some elements of good governance in a place where they feel like it has fallen down. So they will provide information about things that are going on in their agencies. They'll provide context for their audience of this is happening and this is what this means, or this has never happened before and it's weird that it is now, those kinds of things. You can trace the history of the AltGov back to the day of the presidential inauguration in 2017. That day, as soon as the inauguration was over, an account from Badlands National Park started tweeting climate change information. And climate change information was particularly relevant because during the transition between presidents, there were quite a few news stories about suppression of scientific information and climate change information in particular. These were so persuasive that there was actually a group of scientists between the US and Canada who were working to copy over publicly held climate change data and store it in other countries until such time as the administration changed again. There was a gag order that was instituted at the Environmental Protection Agency, other things like that, made people very concerned about science. So when these tweets about climate change information showed up pretty much as soon as the president stopped talking at the inauguration, this was seen as quite noteworthy. These tweets were made, and almost immediately after, a New York Times writer saw them, retweeted them, gave it a lot of visibility, and over really just the next few days, many accounts came online as alt accounts, rogue accounts, accounts purporting to be government workers who were sort of taking a stand in favor mostly of science. Um, and these accounts got very quickly hundreds of thousands of followers in some cases. Um, they also immediately presented some risk for some of the accounts. So the people who run the accounts are all anonymous to the public, and they are for a couple of reasons. One reason is because they are afraid that they could be fired from their job if they're seen as opposing the administration. Another reason is that the president announced pretty much as soon as he was inaugurated that he would in fact be running for re-election. So as soon as he did that, he became a candidate, and there are federal laws that say that any government employee cannot participate in campaign activities while they are working. And so some of them were afraid that they would be found on the wrong side of this law, even if most of them are quite careful not to share this kind of information during working hours or on government devices or even on government property. But maybe it seems like they do, right? And that could cause them a lot of headaches. Um, at one point, the government was so irritated with the account for Customs and Immigration that they asked Twitter to turn over the name of the account holder, which Twitter declined to do, and in fact sued the government to keep the name private. The government ended up dropping that case. But that kind of fear of this sort of hassle and of perhaps having your name revealed in order to have vigilante justice, maybe getting swatted or something like that, was also a deterrent for these accounts. So they do remain anonymous. Okay, so the methods for the study that I'm talking about today include a little over 2 years of interviews with AltGov account holders. These interviews are conducted in a variety of ways under the terms of an IRB that I do hold with my university, including conversations via the direct message feature on Twitter, which is the way most of the AltGov accounts link up as well, which I have and then I keep in catalog. In some cases, people wanted anonymous phone calls, in which case I just took notes and did not record them. In some cases, people wanted email conversations, those kinds of things. But 2+ years of interviews, different methods for doing that. In the course of doing that, one of the AltGov accounts decided they were going to help me, and on their own came up with this question that they shared. Has AltGov made a valuable impact, should say, on you? Reply to this post if you'd like to expand your answer. And as you can see down here, they got quite a large response. I believe the survey was open for 24 hours, and they got close to 5,000 responses. Again, you know, many, many followers. It was open to anybody who followed them. Several of the accounts retweeted it to give it more exposure. In addition to the close to 5,000 answers, click yes, no, maybe, there were also 154 free response comments. And so I took the free response comments and thematically analyzed them by reading through them, looking for themes, and then taking taking all the parts of all the responses and categorizing them by theme in a way that was exhaustive and mutually exclusive. So there was sometimes more than one theme per response, but these were the major themes that I found. And you can see that there were sort of 3 that were much more popular than others, which were encouragement, information, and entertainment. And let me explain what those are by the way of some examples from the comments that I got. So again, these are AltGov followers who volunteered this information. So when it comes to encouragement, it was mostly the idea that the follower said that because the AltGov has a large number of followers who are active on Twitter, it raises to prominence the ideas that this follower has. It gives me the hope that the civil service is grounded in good people who want to serve the public and honor democracy, that there's a sturdy presence, right? So my idea, it's real. My idea is real. It gives me hope that I'm not the only person who has this idea. Okay, when it comes to information, this was that function of the AltGov that I talked about before of providing context or surfacing information that wasn't getting covered otherwise for their followers. And so they found that valuable as well. That was the second most. And then the third most was entertainment. Most of the AltGov accounts use a relatively snarky voice, sometimes kind of jokey with each other and their followers, sharing funny gifs, those kinds of things. And when you read the comments that were sort of in this realm, it was really almost like a therapeutic kind of thing, sort of like late night talk show hosts we talk about politics, with the idea being that I hear all these things that are going on and they're upsetting, but at least I can laugh about it instead of cry about it. That is what went on there. Okay, affiliation. This one I think relates pretty well to the spiral of silence idea, saying that the site showed me that people all over the country were standing up to oppose these things, right? So the affiliation was that I feel like I am part of something bigger than just me. I am not on my own. There are other people who would agree with me and support me and things like that. And then finally, influence. There were not a lot of responses to the question about this, but I have since found a pretty good number of followers who have been influenced to take direct action as a result of following an AltGov account. So doing things like calling representatives, sending postcards to voters, going out and registering people to vote, showing up at protests and marches, those kinds of things. So that would be the other one. I also looked at the other side of it by asking the AltGov account holders how they felt about the followers. And the first thing I would say is they pay a great deal of attention to their followers. They definitely care a lot that they have followers. They will look at their followers and see, who are particularly influential ones who follow them. They get kind of excited that they have a large number of representatives and a small number of senators who follow them. Or that they have fairly prominent people in the media or prominent entertainers who follow them, some having more than others. And then they also will interact with their followers consistently. So there's a couple of small groups that are regularly interacting with AltGov folks in smaller sets of Twitter direct messages. You can have up to 50 people in a direct message chain. And there are some of these that have gone on daily for years where they have been talking with some other groups of followers. When it comes to the idea of affiliation or being part of something bigger than themselves, the AltGov accounts also define themselves that way, right? Feeling that they are doing what they're doing because they have followers, right? Because people are following them, they know that the things that they're doing are worth the time and effort that they make. And some of them make a great deal of time and effort, right? Some of them will be spending multiple hours a day on their accounts on social media. Okay, so the caveats in the future that we always need to talk about in an academic paper. First of all, the results in this question have all the problems of a convenient sample and are compounded by having a very limited time in which to answer. It would be difficult to get a full population understanding of who all the followers are or to distribute to any sort of sample. So you could look at it as like a very bad response rate, or you could look at it as very badly administered because not everybody would have seen it. Even if they did retweet or reshare it, because of the algorithmic sorting, not every message gets through to every person. So that would be very hard to do, but that is definitely a limitation. The generalizability is low. The other thing is that the method of coding is not optimal. So in order to make sure that I had at least some kind of internal validity in the coding of the free response statements, I did get verification from participants. So I have a small sort of focus group of followers that I did have look over all of my coding and my sort of conclusions from that. And I also had some of the AltGov accounts do that. And, they generally concurred with the things that I found. But this is not the same as having multiple coders. In particular, if I'm trying to make an argument around a theoretical framework, having multiple coders who all understand the same theoretical framework would be essential. Also, I didn't ask specific questions, right? And so I didn't ask specific questions about the opinion climate or about their speech decisions. And so I was able to find some things that I think relate, but it's really more heuristic value toward future research. So my plan for future research is in the near future to do a more systematic survey that uses some validated measures related to spiral of silence kind of questions. But let's get back to that central question, right? The humans versus the robots. So does a complicated opinion environment suppress speech? Are the robots succeeding? The respondents seem to think so. They seem to think that they are the only people who have their ideas, or they would if they did not follow the AltGov account, that the information environment is very hostile to them. On the flip side, does a complicated opinion environment encourage speech? So is the sort of cyber speech cascade idea a benefit of following the AltGov? Respondents also seem to think this. So I guess at best we would say, are the robots succeeding? Yes. Are the humans succeeding? Also, yes. So in that sense, the contribution of the humans is probably worth it to continue to make. All right. Thank you very much, and I'd love to have any comments or questions that you'd like to send my way.